So what's the quickest way to start learning game design? Here's the problem. Making software is serious business. It's time consuming and it takes a lot of skills. Most video games are fairly complex software. There are a few exceptions. So if aspiring game designers have to learn how to make software in order to make video games, then they're going to spend most of their time, if not all of their time, fighting with the problems of making software rather than learning about designing games. Game design gets forgotten. The solution is implemented by every game designer I've ever heard of who also teaches game design, and that is you begin with non-electronic games, tabletop games. Game design is game design. There are lots of different focuses, but you're still trying to design a game and entertain someone. When you design tabletop games, you don't have any need for unusual skills, and so you can focus on game design. So you start with the tabletop. Here is a bunch of reasons why, and I'm going to go through each one individually. First, it's much quicker to make a prototype and actually start playing the game. And it's very important to start playing the game as soon as possible so that you can find out how it's screwed up, because it's always screwed up. So in extreme cases of a simple game, I can conceive the game and make a prototype and be playing it in an hour. That's virtually impossible with video games. Making a prototype for a video game of any complexity takes man weeks or man months or even man years in a few extreme cases. This is one reason why many video game developers start out by making paper versions of their games so they can find out how it's going to work, or at least to some extent, without having to put in all that time to make the software. The motto is fail fast. The sooner you find out that something doesn't work and you can get rid of it, the better off you'll be. The iterative nature of game design, how you keep changing things and incrementally and iteratively moving from the original game, which is not very good, to a good game, is clearly evident when you do it as a tabletop game. You don't have the struggle to make software. You don't have to wait a long time for the software to be changed. Now this is a great contrast with how software was made until recently. Software tended to follow the waterfall method, and the problem with that was you didn't actually get a working prototype until you were nearly done with the entire process, and then you found out that if your prototype didn't meet the needs of the users, which was usually the case, you didn't have time to change it. That has changed quite a bit in the past 5 to 10 years, especially in video games, where game devs have adopted methods like Agile, where the objective is to get a working prototype as soon as possible so that you can test it and find out whether it's actually going to fill your needs. Well, with tabletop games, it's very easy to make that prototype and test it and see whether it works. When you make a tabletop game, it's easy to not be taken in by graphics and visual effects. They won't obscure the game design. Games are good because they play well, not because of how they look. Graphics and so on are secondary. They attract people to the game, but they don't keep them in the game. It's how the game plays that keeps them in the game. And yet, even in tabletop games nowadays, I've seen inexperienced designers spend far too much time making their prototype look pretty and not enough time on making their prototype play well. And the result is they have a poor game. In fact, it's not as true now as it used to be, but it used to be you could identify a novice designer because they'd bring a really pretty prototype and say, well, I've never played this, I've never had anybody play it. they should never have spent a lot of time on a pretty prototype, because it's going to get torn up anyway, figuratively if not literally. Your job as a game designer is to design a game that plays well, not one that people enjoy looking at. You have artists that you can rely on, at least you hope you can rely on them, to make the game look good. Another reason to start with tabletop games is more possibilities can be generated and tested in a short amount of time. Game design is about change, and it's easy to change a tabletop game. Sometimes, if the designer is present and the game's being played and there's something that's really fouled up, he can wave his hand, or she can wave her hand and say, we're going to change that rule because it doesn't work, and then proceed. You can't do that with software. Somebody has to go back and modify the software, which can be an extensive situation. You don't even have to know everything about your game before you make a prototype, because if the designer's there, he can decide when he needs to decide how something's going to work. You have to know everything for the video game so that the programmers and the artists and so on can put it together and make software. Another reason, which we've alluded to in various ways, gameplay becomes the focus point of the creation. And that's what really counts, is a gameplay. Another reason is that computers cannot be the scapegoats. It's easy for people designing a video game to do what I call hiding behind a computer. Something's not working right, and they say, well, when we get it all finished and the software gets debugged and so on, it'll be fine. Well, that may be true sometimes, but perhaps more often there's a design flaw, and there's nothing that the computer can do to save that or fix that design flaw. It's got to be fixed by the game designers. But if they wait until everything's debugged and it's all settled, then they don't have the time to solve the problem. And I wrote an article about this for a Game Career Guide quite a while ago, and there's the URL. And you can find lots of other articles like that on Game Career Guide and elsewhere on the web. Now, the next video, I'll describe computer-based alternatives if you don't want to try tabletop games.